Okay. All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. My name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I'm excited for our third panel of the day, I think it's like the 10th panel of the series, and that is for counseling and therapy. So for this panel, we've got two fantastic individuals who've made the shift, and they were just telling me a little bit about their background. And so I think there's going to be a really great perspective for y'all to learn about making this potential move out of student affairs. A few quick logistical details. On your screen, you'll see a website. That website will take you to a Google Drive where there is a Google Doc for every single presentation. On the Google Doc, there's information about our panelists, and they've all been so generous to share their contact information so that if you have follow-up questions, you can get a hold of them that way. Everyone is in listen-only mode right now, so if you have questions, feel free to send them in the chat, and I'll be able to fold them into the presentation. If you would prefer to be muted and say your question aloud, that's totally an option. Just send me a message or use the little raise hand icon and I'd be happy to unmute you. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you have two options. The first is to change your name. So if you, on the participant list, go to more, you'll have the option to rename yourself, and you can move it, make your name anything to disguise your identity a little bit more, or you can send a message directly to me. And although I will see your identity, I will not reveal your identity when asking the question to our panelists. So I believe that is everything. We'll go ahead and get started by having our panelists introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Kayla. Kayla, would you tell us who you are, what your current role is, and then what your background in student affairs and higher education is?
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Kayla Gross, and I am a comprehensive school community treatment therapist. That is a fancy way to say that I'm a school-based mental health therapist. I work for an agency called Altacare of Montana. And so that agency, whenever you interview, sometimes you interview for specific schools, sometimes you just interview for the agency. And so the agency placed me in a very small high school of about 170 kids, 9 through 12, in rural Montana. And so that is what I do now. It's a little bit different than school counseling. I'm sure we'll get into kind of some of the logistics of that as we go on. It sounds very similar, but it's a little bit different. And so my background in student affairs, higher education is residence life. I was a resident assistant for 2.5 years in undergrad, and I graduated in December of 15 with my bachelor's of psych. And I absolutely did not want to go straight to get my master's because I was beyond burnt out. And so I figured, hey, I think I like being an RA. Let's see how this goes. And I am very lucky that I was able to enter into a residence life position with my bachelor's degree. I was a resident director. It was called Resident Life Associate for 1.5 years at a small rural school in West Virginia, my home state, for 1.5 years. And then in June of 17, I left to pursue my master's degree in counselor education, specifically clinical mental health and clinical rehabilitation counseling. And I graduated in May of 19 from Ohio University. I accidentally wore this shirt today, but I guess it fits. And so I graduated in May of 19, and I moved to Montana. I actually was in a different position when I moved to Montana as a inpatient child and adolescent therapist for a residential facility. And they closed the facility 2 months after I moved there. And so the transition was crazy, but I'm very lucky that I ended up where I am. So a lot of background, a few little different things. So
great, thank you so much, Kayla. Johanna.
Yes. Hi, I'm Johanna Karasik, and I am a counselor in private practice. I own Defining Path Counseling in Denver, Colorado, and my student affairs higher education background goes back to right after my undergrad, actually. Also, I worked for Hillel initially, the Jewish student organization. I did a lot of student engagement work. I then worked for nonprofits, and then I ended up working in residence life at a small private faith-based institution, and then continued in res life for a while, probably about 8 years. I was at a mid to large public 4-year institution doing residence life as a hall director. I did alcohol and drug education and prevention. I had a student conduct specific role. And then I moved into a community college, working as overseeing our student conduct, our case management. I did threat assessment. So I've worked for a variety of institutions, doing a lot of roles, but I would say that my identity is really focused on conduct and case management. That's really where I focused a lot of the time and found a lot of passion. I left higher education less than a year ago. It was last August, and it's June now. And for the recording, I know you know it's June. So I've been out for about 10 years. I left because I was starting an internship. So I did a first master's degree while I was working in higher ed. I used a tuition reimbursement, great program. But I did a master's in criminal justice and decided I wanted to make a transition, wanted to go into private practice. And you need a master's in counseling to do that. So I also did a program like Kayla in clinical mental health at Adams State University, which is an online program, and you have in-person experiences for your practicum and internship. And right before I started my internship, I left my role, decided to focus solely on school, because at that point I was doing both full-time. And I'm still in school. I only have 2.5 more weeks, and then I'm graduated. But I started private practice on May 1st.
Awesome. Congrats. Well, congrats on your upcoming graduation as well.
Yeah,
yeah, I bet you are. Johanna, would you mind putting your university's name in the chat box just in case people didn't catch that?
Yes, and actually I have a link to the program, especially because it's an online program. There are folks from all over the country that attend it, and I would recommend looking into the program if you're interested.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so our first question is really to focus on the transition and what transferable skills exist. So I'm curious to know a little bit about what you do in your current role and how specifically you brought skills from student affairs to be able to allow you to accomplish those responsibilities. And we'll start with Johanna this time first.
Yeah, so I determined that I was going to work with individual adults. There's different populations you can work with. I don't work with children. I choose not to do couples counseling or family counseling, although it certainly comes up with individuals. As a private practice owner, I'm responsible for everything. So I'm responsible for marketing, for getting my name out there, for networking, for finding clients, for retaining clients, referring clients out when they need higher levels of care or they just need other resources. Because I'm not fully licensed yet, you have to do a couple of years, particularly after your graduation, before you're licensed. You have to be supervised during that time. You need a certain number of supervised hours in your state. And so I pay for supervision. Some people choose to work at agencies and get supervision as part of that. But that is something that I coordinate on my own. I'm responsible for knowing, the certifications and what I need for licensure. I have to figure all of that out and coordinate all of that. There are so many transferable skills. I'll go through them quickly, what I found, but certainly with the conduct background, and it comes up in res life, many other areas, but understanding ethical and legal implications, case law is huge. Finding resources, building relationships with referral sources, with other colleagues, with group therapy, with rehab facilities, support groups, AA, all of that is vital. Individual conversations were key for me. So all of those skills that you use in case management and student conduct, ideally, if you have an educational philosophy with that and restorative justice philosophy. Those are very counseling-like. You use a lot of similar counseling skills depending on your counseling approach. Helping people build coping skills, be successful in ways that are, mean success for them. I used a lot of motivational interviewing in my, apologies, in my work, and I use it very much in my counseling sessions. Documentation, while I know many of us do not love it, it is part of the counseling world. You have to still document. It's part of ethical practice. And so learning, what is enough to document, what is the responsible amount of documentation, that comes in handy for me. I had a lot of fellow interns that really struggled with that, and because I had so much practice writing conduct letters and case management notes and threat assessment stuff, it came really easily. Confidentiality, understanding FERPA and HIPAA, but for me it's HIPAA that is key. Creating educational materials, or if you've done trainings, workshops, that can very much be part of your world as a counselor. If I wanted to supervise again, I can do that after I'm licensed. I can build that into my work as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Kayla, I just want to throw the same question to you and ask you, in your role, which is, obviously they're both counseling and therapy, but quite different. And what transferable skills are you bringing from student affairs to your current role?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how many different things in counseling there are. I would say a lot of what Johanna said, exactly, the documentation thing, man, like all the conduct reports we had to do, I was like, oh my gosh, man. And then I'm like in counseling now and I'm like, yeah, this is cinch. And so that's definitely something that I agree with, that like was easy to transfer between both different things. And then actually, like, kind of going back to it, my internship was at a college. And so kind of with that, it wasn't that different because, I mean, obviously I wasn't involved as much in their lives as I was when I was in res life. But it was still like getting to know the students, getting to know the school, things like that. And a lot of that definitely transferred into at least my school-based role. For that, I was kind of the same way, and I didn't think I wanted to work with kids. But the more that I was looking for jobs after I graduated, the more I realized that I was not going to, because I wanted to still stay in higher ed, but it's kind of hard to get into a school straight out of getting your master's sometimes. A university, not necessarily a school, but and so I ended up kind of falling into my role, and I worked from ages 6 to 17 years old were in the facility that I worked in. And so a lot of that was just peer mediation stuff, because, man, there were some instances where we would have just kids just going after each other. And especially with that high level of mental health things going on, they don't necessarily understand, especially because, I mean, my 6-year-old's not going to understand a lot of these things. And so it's like, it was definitely interesting because, like, I mean, I mostly worked with college students before I got into it, but then it was, the transition wasn't that bad because I'm so used to dealing with people in certain situations, like peer mediation or like conflict with others. It's just, it's kind of crazy. I'm kind of stumbling a little bit because I think that Johanna really brought it home with what a lot of our transferable skills were. But like my age range that I work with now, 9th through 12th, is not that much younger than the age range that I worked with in higher ed. And so it wasn't that different. I will say, I feel like I know them a lot better than my students because it's such a more intimate thing. But yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Oh, that's great. Just to share, I work at a university that also has a K through 12 institution as part of our organization. And it's really been interesting to speak with like our Title IX folks who support the entire organization all the way from, you know, K4 through doctoral level studies and post-grad research and everything. And they say that, you know, like there's actually so much fundamental stuff that needs to be happening at the K through 12 level, that had the college students had it when they were in K through 12, they wouldn't, you know, the learning is quite similar. It's just that the folks in college never had it when they should have had it in K through 12. And so now they're just working at it at a different, more age appropriate, you know, delivery. So that's helpful. Thanks. Okay. So I'm really curious about the learning curve. Like, I'm not surprised to learn that there's so much transferable, and I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad for everyone on the call to hear that as well. But what about the first year in this transition? What gaps did you identify that you did have that you needed to fill? And how would you go about obtaining the skills and knowledge that you needed to fill that? So this one we'll give to Kayla first.
Are you referencing like the transition just from higher ed to our programs, or the transition with COVID?
Oh, good question. So I would say specifically to your programs, to this new path for you, but if there are things that came up through COVID, absolutely feel free to share.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I can think of one specific time in grad school that I really struggled, just because I went into grad school thinking that therapy was something completely different than what it actually is, or being a therapist. I thought it was just like a lot of advice giving, stuff like that, when in all reality, like, you have to kind of let the clients utilize their own capabilities and things like that to come to a conclusion for themselves. I can't be like, okay, we'll do A, B, and C, and then things will get better. Like, you can obviously say, well, this has worked in the past for certain people, but this may not work for you. And so we had to film ourselves. My first semester of grad school, it was like mock therapy to another student in the program. And I remember the doctoral, because my program has both a master's and a PhD track, and I was in the master's track, and the PhD first year student who was assigned to be kind of like our overall mentor, like, very nicely, but like ripped into me because like I did it all wrong. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I had to really take a step back and examine, like, what is therapy? What am I doing? What is going to help the clients? And I mean, obviously throughout the program, you really do learn how to become a better therapist. Obviously, I mean, that's what the master's degree is for. And so with that was probably my biggest transition from just in grad school. My biggest transition into my jobs that I've had since I graduated. I mean, like, I was out there a month before my facility told me they were closing. And like, I'm from West Virginia. I'm at my parents' house right now. This is not my normal area. And I had literally just moved to Montana. And so with that, just
Should I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Kayla. We're having an issue with your audio, so we're going to let Johanna take over, and then we'll get back to you.
She might have said just a second. She might be. Anyway, okay, so I'll jump in. So the question was basically gaps. What are my biggest challenges as I transition to private practice? And, you know, for me, the biggest gaps are really about the business side, and how are you your own entity? So I've always worked for these organizations that come with a lot of challenges, right? Tough moments, and they take care of so many things. They take care of benefits, retirement, health insurance, disability, you know, all of those things. And I don't have a business background. I don't have side gigs selling things. I don't have an MBA, that kind of thing. So those are my biggest gaps. The way that I tackle those, I have a few different methods. One is networking and building my own community is so important. Well, actually, first, that's important. But first, I found an internship that I knew would set me up for success. The internship is a required part of the master's degree, and you can work for agencies, you can work for schools, depending on your program. And I found an internship that was an affordable counseling program that also was essentially set up like a private practice in which you're supervised. So I was taught how to do things like negotiate fee in a sliding scale program and collect the payment. I didn't get the payment, but I collected it for them. And, you know, setting up your own paperwork and the required things that need to go in a disclosure statement and that sort of thing. And part of that internship too, there were so many people that left the internship and then started private practice. Many people do wait until they're licensed to do that, but I had so many role models that were just jumping in and doing it. And I decided I could do it too. So I did it. And that's why I'm doing that now instead of doing something else. I network, I find my communities, I get myself involved in the internship alumni community. I go to all sorts of webinars. I connect on social media. I ask questions. There's all sorts of websites. There are people that, as part of a side income stream, I'd say, offer webinars and workshops to practitioners that are starting private practice or want to build their private practice. There's also a lot of free resources out there, which is really what I use. And so there's checklists of things you need to do, like registering a business name and like all of these things that I've never thought about. I didn't know how to build a website. I built a website. So the resources are there. They just take more energy and sometimes a little bit more anxiety from me. But I also know that I've done a lot of really tough things when I worked for higher ed. And so I can figure some of these other things out.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I want to stay with you for just 1 second because I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about your decision to go directly into private practice. I know you said you had great role models or, you know, you were seeing that happen, so it seemed like an option for you, but could you talk a little bit more about why you decided to do that? And then if you would be willing to either put in the chat or share aloud, and I'll try and find them, what some of those free resources or even the opportunities for paid ones would be for folks to look into?
Yeah, I wish I had prepared that second question. Yeah, I'll do that. So okay, so when I decided to make this transition, my goal was private practice. And if you decide that you want to do counseling, you really need to research, and I have a link for this, but what are your state requirements? What's required in order to practice as a counselor? And there are probably some unlicensed counselor gigs around in the community. Those exist, and I would encourage you to look for those. However, if you want to go into private practice, you need to be licensed. In Colorado, there is a status today, and I literally mean today because it might not be here in a few weeks, called registered psychotherapist. And you can essentially take an exam online and you can legally practice. Ethically, many people would say it's questionable, and I agree. However, I'm currently a registered psychotherapist, which is why I was able to just launch right away and not have a gap between my internship. So it is possible. It might not be possible in every state though. And I'm not familiar with how candidate licenses work in terms of private practices in other states. However, when I finish my degree, I'll be applying for essentially changing my status to be a licensed professional counselor candidate, which is the candidate status for the licensure, still be supervised and all of that. I wanted to do private practice. I was not excited about having to find another situation where I would be working for other people, where I would be in another bureaucracy, in another environment that I would have to navigate. And I really just wanted to work for myself. So when I went into the program thinking, oh, I'll have to figure out what to do for 2 years. I'll have to find a job. It'll be 2 years. I'll get through it. I'll survive. But then when I saw all of these role models, like all these other people who are graduating, starting in private practice, supervisors are all in private practice. And there were many supervisors at this internship. I just knew that I could do it. And they gave us some of the skills. They gave us workshops on, you know, here are the checklists. Here's what you need to figure out. And so I went for it. I don't know if that even expands on it, but that's what happened.
I think that's so helpful for people to know about like the decision to go one path or another. So Kayla, I wanted to ask you, obviously you've gone a different path. Are you where you're at right now? Is that where you think that you will progress for a while, or do you think that you'd eventually want to go a different path with your therapy and counseling work?
Yeah, so I just kind of want to reiterate, absolutely look at the states that you are either planning on practicing in or trying to move to. I know that when I graduated with my master's from OU, a lot of us stayed in Ohio just because the transfer from kind of like college to our jobs was going to be a lot easier if we stayed. However, I wanted to just explore somewhere new, try something different. And so I really looked at where I was applying, what their requirements were, because some programs do not have certain classes that certain states need. So for example, one of my classmates moved actually to West Virginia from Ohio. And weirdly enough, one of the classes that we didn't have, it wasn't required, it was recommended, and I don't think she didn't take it. And she ended up having to take a completely different class from a different university in order to qualify to practice in the state. And so look into what your required classes, recommended classes are for the program to get your master's are at whatever university you may want to attend. And then if you want to stay in the state, awesome. It's pretty easy to go from a program in this state and stay in this state. But if not, then definitely look at and make sure that you have those classes before you move or make that decision. And so I'm kind of the opposite in that with Johanna, just because I did not want to go into private practice right away. I've always felt comfortable kind of with like an overarching thing at first. And so I wanted to transition into something that I wouldn't be the sole decision maker on a person's case. With that, CSCT just really fit because like I work for the agency, they place me in the school. And so I have my supervisor who I directly report to, but I also have a principal and a lot of other different support systems within like a hand's reach. And so that's super helpful. Do I see myself staying in CSCT for forever? No. I eventually do want to get back and go get my PhD. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. I'm not really sure. It changes every day. But with that, I'm not sure what I would like to do eventually. But I like CSCT right now. I really like my school, and that's important because a lot of people, if you don't get placed with a good school that fits you, then it's very hard. And if you don't have that support system, then it can be very difficult. I know a few of my friends who are CSCT just aren't in a very good environment considering what their schools are and things like that. Not what their schools are, like their support systems, their principals, their administrators, things like that. But yeah, I'm not sure whether I love my little school, but I originally moved out for a position in the town that I live in, and my school is like 40 minutes away, which really is not that bad of a commute, all things considered. But the weather in Montana, if you guys haven't heard, is a lot sometimes. And so like I want to kind of transfer back into like just my town. So we'll see if that happens, if I do the school path. If I don't, eventually I think private practice would be cool. I'm just not sure if that's what I'd like to do. Just starting out, I knew I didn't want to do that though.
Great, thank you. So Kayla, I'm gonna give you this question first as well. So happies and crappies, highs and lows, the best part and the worst part. What is the best part of your role and what you do now, and what is the worst part?
I'm going to start with the worst part because it's just the thing that came to mind first. With the kind of downside of not being your own boss, of having like an agency, is probably productivity. There's an expectation that you have to have so many hours or units with clients per month per se. And so we're really lucky that in Montana, their Medicaid covers, if the kid has Medicaid, they cover me, which is not something that happens that often, unfortunately. However, because I am unlicensed, like Johanna said, we have to be supervised for so many hours. For example, mine is 3,000 hours. And so with that, I was actually lucky enough to move to a state though that did accept my internship hours towards that. A lot of places don't. And so with that, a lot of insurances don't take me because I'm unlicensed, which is sad because like the kid really needs the services and I can't provide them. That's kind of the biggest thing between school counseling and being placed by an agency in the school. I am considered the highest level of care. It's like a tier, TIER system. And tier 1 is like a kid does not need to have any services. Tier 2 is like school counselor, like check-ins, things like that, a little bit more support. And then tier 3 is myself as a consistent like mental health therapist. I have them scheduled. I see them every day, just around the school. But at least for me, I like to schedule my clients at least once a week, if not more, depending on their need of care. And so kind of with that, there's an unwritten kind of pressure that some people feel trying to get that productivity. I will say that our expectations were a lot lowered with COVID happening, because like it's pretty easy for me to go from my office to a student's classroom and see if they're there and go get them, whereas they had the decision to come to therapy online. And so I had over half of my clients who still did come to therapy, but just kind of that pressure was a lot. And so I think that's the kind of the crappiest part of at least my job. The happiest is seeing them kind of flourish and like just from where they started to where they end up at the end of it. This being my first year in the school system, like I had just one student who was on my caseload that graduated. Most of my kids are students. Sorry, I hate when I use the word kids. Most of my students are, actually they'll be seniors this year, the majority of my caseload. And so where the students started when they started therapy versus the things they were able to do when they graduated that they couldn't at the beginning was a really huge thing. We were one of the few states that allowed graduation ceremonies. So my school chose to go ahead with it, and we socially distanced. They actually did it very, very well. And so I did get to see that student graduate, which was, it's so bittersweet, because it's like when a student or a client leaves your caseload, when you discharge them, for say they're doing really good and that you guys come to a mutual decision that you want to end therapy, after that, you could never see them again and never know what they're doing. And so that's a weird part, but like, it's just gratifying. I don't know if gratifying is the right word, but it's just good to see change. And you're not going to see that in everyone whenever they first start versus when they leave, especially when I worked residential. But you plant those seeds and you hope that they grow eventually, and you hope that they take those tools and they utilize them. And so that's the best part, is just kind of seeing the change that happens in clients.
Awesome. Thanks, Kayla. Same question to you, Johanna.
Yeah, I didn't realize that this was the impact on me until Kayla was talking about it. But like the transition from higher ed to counseling, especially in my internship, I would have clients that would just peace out. They wouldn't come back, and I still think about them. You know, I wish them well. I hope that they're well, but you can't go to their hall director and be like, hey, can you check in on this person? It's interesting to have to sit with that and know that I did my best and ethical work, and they are their own person. And that is also a good part of counseling. For me, my favorite part is the same favorite part that I had in higher ed, and that is really sitting with individual folks. When I was with students, even if it was student conduct and I was having to suspend them, or or it was case management or whatever it was. In counseling now, my most fulfilling part is really just sitting with a client. There's something about that sacred space that you create with another person, and you have that vulnerable space and confidential space, and it's just really powerful, and can be really difficult sometimes, and also like the reason why I do this work. A good part, and it's like a, you know, the double-sided sword cliche or something. So I make the decisions, and a lot of times that's great. If I of course have ethical and legal regulations to abide by, but if I want to make changes in my practice, I do it. When I wanted to do sliding scale, I made it happen. I decided I didn't want to have sessions before 10 o'clock, so I don't do that. If I want to talk about racism with my clients, I do that. I don't have to go through these bureaucratic like levels upon levels to talk about philosophy and you know, all of that. If I don't want to work with specific populations, like I shared that I don't work with children, as an example, I refer those to competent colleagues. I get to create my own boundaries that are also within the realm of the profession, and that's really freeing, really, really freeing. It's also sometimes scary in a, I don't know, like it's an unsettling thing sometimes, because if changes happen, for instance, if I got a subpoena or something, I don't have student affairs legal team on the other line, you know, coming in like, I need to find my attorney, I need to do that research. If there's a legal change, I need to figure out how that impacts my practice and then implement it. There aren't these clear cut structure, plans, and, you know, a group of people behind how are they going to share this information with me and that sort of thing. So that can be difficult, because it can feel really lonely, which is another reason why I need to network and talk and engage and just be part of the counseling community so much.
Great, thank you both so much. So, oh good, a question has come here. Yeah, and this is where I was going to go too. So, and I was just going to invite everyone, you know, a reminder to throw your questions in the chat, or let me know if you'd like to ask. This is a space that I do not have a lot of knowledge on, and so I recognize that there may be questions that need to be asked that I'm missing. So thank you so much for the question that just came in the chat too. It talks about the emotional weight of being a counselor or therapist, and the burnout, sadness, and numbness that might come with that. So I think that, Johanna, if you want to start us off on this question.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. It's something that I experienced in higher education, you know, especially doing the kind of work when you're working with folks that were assaulted, when they're, you know, struggling with homelessness. Like when you're carrying all of this, compassion fatigue is real, vicarious trauma is real. And so really, I mean, using your supervisor, there's a reason why we have supervision, and this is one of them, so that when you to help you recognize when you are being impacted in a way that will then impact your clients, which is problematic on different levels. I seek my own therapy, so I have my own confidential space to talk about concerns. Self-care is really important. It sounds really basic and like, yeah, everyone talks about it, but exercise and eating well and sleeping and, you know, all of those things, and, you know, especially with the pandemic and stay-at-home orders and all of that, those similar things are just so important. Having an awareness when cases are impacting you is key for counselors. Clients come and talk about all sorts of aspects of their lives, their families. Sometimes they have similar family structures, they've had similar trauma experiences, and it's really driven home, at least it was in my program, that you need to do your own therapy, you need to do your own work, because whatever you haven't dealt with will definitely come into your counseling session. And it has. I've actually been surprised. There were things that came up that I wasn't expecting with my clients over the last year, and I was like, oh, this is real. So I had to take action and do my own work.
Great, thanks. Kayla, same question. Just how are you dealing with the emotional weight?
Yeah, so I'll kind of put it in a twofold thing. Pre-COVID and post-COVID. Well, not post-COVID, oh my Lord. Pre-COVID and life now. In my internship, whenever I was in grad school, I definitely did have my own therapist. That is kind of the benefits of like being in a school, going to school there, is that a lot of them offer free or reduced rate counseling, and they have counselors right at your hand on campus. And so I recognized, I'm like, hey, I'm struggling with this. I should probably go to therapy. And I will say that like the stigma behind therapy and how like it's not talked about and how people may feel weird to go to therapy, like that doesn't go away even when you are a therapist and you're going through it sometimes. Unfortunately, I still felt nervous before like going to therapy, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm literally getting my degree in this. But like I just want to normalize that it's okay to be nervous about it, and it's okay to talk about it too. And so with that, after I graduated and moved and transitioned into my first and second role, exercise is a big thing for me too. Huge for me. Just because in order to feel good, I need to have an outlet somewhere, and that is one of my outlets. Along with that, cooking and eating well also are one of my things too. And I know it's so not easy to do that sometimes, but I recognized when I went into my grad program, the two things that I wanted to keep consistent for my own sanity and mental health was cooking as often as I could, and eating well, cooking / eating well, and trying to have some kind of routine with exercise. Routine is huge for me, and I recognize that, and that's just me as a person. Oh man, since everything started happening with COVID, self-care has taken a different path, and burnout and emotional well-being have been difficult. I'm not gonna lie. I thought that the first month and a half of the transition, I was like, okay, this is going really well. Online therapy is not that bad, but like I get really weird headaches, or like I don't even know if it's vertigo, but like if I'm staring at a computer screen for too long with like lights blaring at me and I'm not getting up and moving, then I get sick. And so like it was really taking a toll on me at first. And then after, I want to say in April, my agency made a decision to reduce all of us down because of productivity reasons. And so my program, which was extremely, like we were productive, we were doing really good in COVID, they still made the decision to reduce us, but we were reduced down to 20 hours a week, whereas other people were like 20 hours a month of just checking in with clients, like 4 hours a week. And now since the summer happened, I have been reduced to hourly by appointment only, just with my clients, instead of like a full 40 getting paid, everything like that, which is fine. I honestly needed that reduction. But I think just checking in with yourself and recognizing, just kind of like an end of the day thing that I always do, is like, okay, how did today go? Did I bring anything into session that wasn't necessary because of my own crap? And so just being really self-aware has helped. And that happened with my program. You kind of really have to check in with yourself as often as you can in order, I don't want to say to be successful, but in order to feel okay. Because we hear a lot of stuff, especially with my kids that were in inpatient residential, like they have been through some of the most traumatic things that I have ever heard of ever. But just kind of keeping a routine and trying to remind myself that if I bring things home, then it's just not going to be good for my personal life either, or my partner's personal life. And so, I mean, there's days where, yeah, obviously it's a bad day. I'm not going to be in a good mood, and you're allowed to have those days too. And so just really checking in with yourself and recognizing, hey, I might need to go back to therapy. Yeah. So being okay with that. You can be a therapist and have a therapist. Like that's definitely a good thing too.
Can I add one more thing?
Of course.
I've also recognized through the program and my experience with internship, and just also reflecting on my experience in student affairs, that for me, having a diverse caseload is really important to prevent burnout. And what I mean by diverse in this aspect is diversity of concerns, presenting concerns. So it's important to me, like I want to work with people that are grieving and have loss, which by the way is everybody, but I want to work with people with just different concerns. But I know that I need to have some variety of what I walk into every day. I don't want to always be working with someone who is in the depths of grief or in the depths of addiction and that sort of thing. So I've gotten a lot of pressure, and sometimes this comes up in school or otherwise, where it's like, find your niche, find your niche. And I know that's important for marketing. It's also important for me to not burn out, to be able to work with a lot of different folks.
That's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so there's a question about actually making the transition. And this is a little bit different than some of our other panels where it's like, oh yeah, you know, I revised my resume and I went for it. You have to make a very, very determined choice when you make this change. So the question is, at what point did you realize that you wanted to transition out of higher ed, but then also specifically go back to school to be a therapist? And I think we're starting with Kayla with this one.
I recognize whenever I graduated from my undergrad program with psych that I eventually wanted to go back and get my master's, and I needed to do it sooner rather than later for myself. And so I always knew that that role that I was in res life was going to be a temporary situation. And like, I was actually honest with my supervisor about whenever I started applying for programs, like I'm going to leave, and they were super, super supportive of me. They're like, we are never going to discourage somebody from bettering themselves and getting a better education. And I'm like, holy cow, I am lucky. And so I realized my last semester of undergrad that I wanted to go into mental health therapy. I thought I wanted to be a college counselor. I loved higher ed at the time, and I still do in certain aspects. Am I glad that I'm not in it right now? Yes, for a lot of different reasons. And so I went to a therapist my last semester at my institution. It's Jesuit. I don't care. It's actually no longer that name. So I realized my last semester of undergrad that I went in therapy, and I was like really struggling with what I was going to do with my psych degree. And I just kind of like a light bulb went off. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I can do this. And so that year and a half that I had in between, I had a semester where I just chilled because I graduated in December. And then I think at the beginning of the fall semester of 2016, I was like, okay, I should probably start applying and looking at programs. And so that was kind of my transition out of higher ed into full-time, like being a student again. And I actually did not, because I was on campus in class with my stuff. I wasn't online. And so with that, I actually didn't work in student affairs whenever I was going to grad school. I worked in a few different places as a graduate assistant throughout my time there. But I think a lot of institutions, this is something really kind of important to say. If you plan on going to an on-campus program, a lot of places will choose from their higher ed master's program cohort for those student affairs positions. That's what I really ran into, is that they wanted to choose from their cohort more than outside things. And that's its own can of worms. And I could talk for a while about that. But with that, I went through my whole program. I did my internship at a college, different from the one I was going to, which was super cool because I went to a pretty big college. I mean, my cohort was super small, but like my college that I ended up being an intern at was small private. And I was like, this is cool. Cause I mean, I've been in small private institutions before. I thought I wanted to be a college counselor. I was dead set on it. And then I recognized I couldn't get my job like that right away. And so then I was a nursing student at first in undergrad, and I really liked my rotation that was in inpatient adolescent. And I was like, oh, maybe I should start looking into that. And I did. And that's how I ended up where I am. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think that
Thanks,
answers
Kayla.
it. I'm looking. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay.
Johanna, talk about your decision. I know you said you took advantage of like the tuition benefit at your institution that was for your criminal justice master's. That was different. Okay, so how did you make the decision to go back and get some more education and transition?
So there's a quote that I'm gonna mess up, but sometimes I share with my clients. Basically, you change when the pain of changing is less than the pain of changing the same, or something like that. You need to figure out your own, like where your own line is. For me, I had been working in higher education in different facets, like for probably about 12 of the previous 16 years professionally. I had my last few organizations where I had many good years at those organizations, and I also had years that were not good. I won't go into it obviously here, but I just hit a point where I knew that I needed something different. I hit it for me. It was my line. And I created a plan to get myself to that next track. For me, what that meant was saving everything I could. I lived incredibly frugally. I saved as much income as I could and put it away because I knew that there would be times where I would not be having income. Researched, cost. I chose a program based on cost, based on convenience in terms of the online situation. If we have the quote in the chat, change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And we change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. Consequences give us the pain that motivates us to change. Thank you. So I was not thrilled about having to do another master's degree. I didn't do my first master's for I started about 9 years after I finished my undergrad. I didn't do a master's degree right away because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so it didn't make sense to me to specialize in something, and was in a hall director role with a bachelor's degree. Got a lot of pressure and messages that I needed a master's degree in order to move up to do anything. So I got a master's degree. I chose a curriculum with the criminal justice program that I was interested in. And it was a good program. I enjoyed it. And I was glad it was over and I thought it was done. And I was kind of resentful. I was like, what do you mean I have to do another master's program? Do you have any idea how much counseling I do in my work now? And I was very skilled and I was very experienced. And I will also say that in prep for one of these questions today, I acknowledge that that program was so instrumental to how I am now as a therapist. I learned so much in that program really from day one. There weren't any useless classes for me. And there were a lot of familiar concepts and it went much more in depth and I just had so many more perspectives. It really was worth it. And I also totally buy into the structure of needing more education, needing supervision, needing all of that as much as a headache as it is. I'd be happy to talk with people offline and individually about that. I would also recommend talking to career counselors about that, about like decisions and how you decide for career, or just like kind of, that's my MI coming out, like rocking that ambivalence of they recognize they were in the contemplative stage. So, you just got to sort it out. I just hit a wall. I started making a plan. And while I was, enacting that plan, that helped me feel more control over my situation because I was working towards something. So while it wasn't immediately resolved, I was making steps toward that next thing. I also had a really, just in general, stressful job. I was doing a lot of threat assessment, working with some really high level cases, had a lot of responsibility, and those are really important jobs. And if anyone is still, on this doing that job, thank you for doing that. It's really, really important. I knew that I couldn't do that for another 5 years. That was I was like, I'm about to burn out. Like someone was asking about burnout. I was like, I need to make a change. I need to diversify. I need to move to another path.
Great. Thank you both so much for that. So there is a question in the chat about how many hours you're providing therapy each week and what the pay benefits look like. And we have about 5 minutes left before we have to end it. So I want to ask, if possible, if Johanna and Kayla, if you would mind typing kind of a response to that in the chat. But then I want to ask one last question, is just open-ended. What additional information would you like to share with folks who are considering this? What do they need to be thinking of as they move forward? What recommendations do you have? That kind of thing. So Johanna, you can start us off with this one.
Yeah, so I recommend that you talk to other counselors who are in the state that you would want to practice in. There's a lot of different types of counselors. School counselors, like school counseling programs, will train through K through 12 and clinical mental health and agency private practice. We all work at, ideally your schools have counseling programs. So just connect with different counselors and find out about their path and what interests them. And everyone has different takes on it. These are just mine and Kayla's. And you can get a lot of variety and perspective and suggestions. It also might really depend on your state. And it's also just helpful to network. You can find free workshops and connect with other people. So that's the first. Actually, that might be the only thing that I haven't talked about. I had put a link in the chat about the state recs for licensure. That's through the American Counseling Association, ACA, which is a major professional association that would have more information about ethics and learning opportunities and that sort of thing.
Perfect, thanks. Kayla, what's your kind of final takeaways, recommendations, and thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, reach out. I mean, I want to reiterate that I also am like super open to talking to anybody outside of this space in order, if you guys have questions, like specific programs, things like that, I'm so down for that. Along with that, like, make sure that when you go into your master's program, you are prepared for a lot of stuff. Mine was extremely intense. If you go full-time, most programs are 3 years, and it's a 60-hour program. Mine was shoved into 2, which is fine. I wanted to get it done with. I wanted to get it done with in practice. I love working, and so I like being in school too, but like I like working. So I kind of wanted to do it in the short amount of time as I could, feasible, but it was hard. And if you think that you have the mindset for it, definitely look into programs, try to pursue it. But look into state requirements for sure. That is the biggest thing, is that when I went into the program, I was like, oh, I just want to be a therapist, I'll go somewhere else, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of work that goes into applying for state licensure, getting approved, making sure you have enough supervision, making sure your hours are in. I will say that COVID has kind of thrown a wrench in me becoming independently licensed faster. I was supposed to be done with my hours by the end of this year. That's not going to happen because I'm not working 40 hours right now. And so with that, just be prepared for a lot of curveballs. But it is so rewarding to be a therapist. I love my job. I love what I do. I love my students. I love my school, and I'm extremely lucky that I do. Because a lot of people don't like their job, and it shows, and it makes me very sad with some therapists because they start getting mean, and that's not cool. And so with that, it's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's hard being a therapist. It's hard going into the program, but if you think you want to do it, go for it. There is a huge need for mental health professionals everywhere. To the person who asked the pay and benefits, I kind of put in the chat, but I just want to reiterate, like, we do a lot of work for not as much pay as we should get. I will say that you're not going to get rich being a therapist, more than likely. If you do, can you hit me up with your tips and tricks? But I don't know. I'm happy, and I want to say you will be too, but I don't know your life, and that's the therapist coming out of me, because it's like, well, it could work for this person, but not this person. But like, go for it. I mean, this has been the best decision I made ever, was to go back, get my master's, and do this, because if you want to see a job that you are going to make change in, you will see it in a good amount of your, at least for me so far, it's been a good amount of my clients. And even just like one little thing they do once while they're in therapy with you, like you'll see it. Private practice is different because it's kind of like more structured, and you kind of see them at your own schedule, their schedule, your schedule, like once, twice a week, or however you schedule it. But for me, like I see that growth every single day. Well, when I was in school, because I was in school, and then residential, you're kind of with them a lot more than just your scheduled sessions. And so definitely look at the different tracks. Career counseling is a part of counseling and therapy. Like I took a class in it. It was super cool. And so if you want to do that, go for it. But there's so many different things you can do with this degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's a good point, is we had our career and life coaching session immediately prior to this. And it's interesting how there was a discussion in that chat about, do you need to have certifications? Do you need additional education? And no one on our panel had gone any type of certification or additional. Oh, I think maybe we had one panelist who did. I'm sorry, we did have one panelist who did do that. And so then with this work, of course, there's no, you know, you, of course you have to get additional education and everything to be able to practice in that space. So it's kind of different on what you're looking to do, but you know, I second, third, everyone's comments about the importance of mental health and having folks who are talented and passionate in doing that. And so it's awesome that we have student affairs folks who are interested in bringing their experiences to those positions. So Kayla, Johanna, thank you so much for all the information that you shared. I know that you put some information, both of you, in the chat as well. So thank you. And just so everyone knows that when these are posted, we will have the chat log as well. So if you didn't get a chance to scribble those down, you'll have a chance to refer to them then. So Johanna, Kayla, thank you so much. Everyone who attended, thank you as well. Have a wonderful afternoon. And I think we'll see folks again. Our next panels are on Wednesday.
Thanks so much, Jeannie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.